I'm really happy to pass over to Eugenia and to hear what she's got to say from Brazil.
Hello, sisters. Welcome. Thank you for coming here. Hello to my panelists. I'm very honored to share this moment with you. And thanks to Women's Campaign for inviting me. And thank you for all of you for coming. Our key year here in Brazil about gender identity politics and pimp lobbying is 2013. Until these years, if you say this expression trans women, because here we would say mulheres trans, we didn't use these expressions. We would say that a man that desires being a woman would be a transsexual a man that had this problem called transsexualism. We just didn't use this. We would never think that prostitution would be a work. I mean, this would be unthinkable for Brazilian people, and especially for left people or any woman that calls herself a feminist. If you say anything about trans and kids, people would think you would be nuts. But 2013 was really the year here in Brazil. On this year, these two bills started here in Brazil. These two Congress people started these two bills. The first bill was called Projeto de Lei João Nery. It means Bill João Nery. João Nery is the name of a trans man, a transactivist. He passed away, I think, last year or 2 years ago. And the second one was Projeto de Lei Gabriela Leite. It means Bill Gabriela Leite. Gabriela Leite is the name of a prostitute here, a prostitute mother, a prostitute woman, and she also passed away. So, and these two bills were started for the same Congress people, a gay activist, Jean Willis, which is from a left party, PSOL, PSOL, and the woman is a lib femme called Erika Cocai, from another party, PT, Partido dos Trabalhadores. It would be something as Labour Party here in Brazil. So since these two bills were started on the same year by these two left people, this gay man and this lib femme woman, left people began to think that these two issues would be really human rights. I mean, really legitimate rights, fair rights, the right thing to do. So these two things, gender identity politics and pimp lobbying, started to be pushed in all spaces in the left and organization and women's movement and feminist movement and Black movement spaces, and in every space. And in some schools in Brazil, depending on the state, depending on the city, even gender identity began to be taught in schools. So on this past 7 years, we've seen all this horrible colonization of social movements here. And we cannot blame only these two parties, because there are many other actors here working on these two issues. So academics here is really, really a thing, you know. I know that in other countries you do have the same problem, but you know that women's studies and feminist studies and even legitimate gender studies were colonized by queer theory. And there was all this movement of postmodernism, and everything is everything and nothing is nothing, and nothing is real and nothing is true, and who are we to say that something is true? Who are we to say who is a woman? And we're not supposed to say that what is a work, everything is everything and nothing's nothing. It's it's a very different perspective from grassroots social movements. Besides all these problems in academic, there is this new trend in Brazilian academy. What we say is local de fala. It would be something like a place to speak, something maybe English spoken people would say a standpoint view. So this so the personal experience became ultra valuable. So if a person says that she or he had this experience, so it must be true, and other kinds of experiences, other kinds of ways to acknowledging the truth became less valuable. So this became, this really helped this transgenderism here in academics, because suddenly we cannot say that trans women are not women because we are not on their places. We do not know how is it to be a trans woman. The same way, if you are not a prostitute, so how can you know? How can you know? We should hear the person which is experiencing this exact thing. So it's very hard. And with all this big salad here, we have this funding problem here in Brazil. You know that Open Society Foundation funds lots of social movements and activists around the world, and in Brazil it's the same. So the problem is that many people do agree with us, but if they say, they might not get the money of these international institutions. And since, you know, money here is a problem, so it's very hard for people to say no. And there is no free lunch. So if you do agree working with these people, I'm gonna give you a personal example. I had this once. I had this speech against pimp lobbying here in Rio, and a teacher, a female teacher, she talked to me that she was very worried about their students because they were poor and there were all this pressure from pimps on their neighborhood. And we had a very good talk, and we became friends. And last year I was reading text of her, maybe on Facebook or Instagram, and she was saying something about sex workers. And when I said, this is so strange. I mean, she just doesn't talk like that. She doesn't use this kind of pimp language. And so I went to Google, and I found out that she has a project. I'm not giving the details because I do not want to expose her or their project. But the fact is that her project got a funding on that year by one of these organizations that pushes transgenderism and pimp lobbying. And I really got sad because I know it's a hard choice to do. I know it's a Sophia's choice to do, because maybe it would be the only way for this teacher to really help their students on this particular project. But the point is, she changed her language, and maybe she changed the way she talks about prostitution with their kids. And this is so dangerous. This is very dangerous, really. So besides all these things, one of the problems that happens here, and I'm sure in every country, is that internet really changed the way that we do politics. So everything must be quick. People are always with no time to think, with no time to do real research. So if you say to a person, hey, I know this book, The Industrial Vagina by Sheila Jeffries, would you buy it? But no, it's easier for people to just read a text on Facebook or a video on Instagram by a pimp woman who calls herself a sex worker, but all of us know she is a pimp. I mean, she really gets women, especially young women, including social movements, including feminists, but I mean, she's just a pimp, what we call in Portuguese a cafetina. So the point is, people really want this easy and quick information. They do not want to do real research, you know, and this is very sad. Plus, people are not so interested as, you know, times to have rational, real conversations about important things. So when you start these people, these social justice warriors, or we call them here in Brazil lacradores, you know, or maybe posmo or postmodern, but we say lacradores. They're always so emotional. So when you start a rational conversation, they start to scream, and you are killing them, and you are killing trans people, you are killing prostitutes, you are killing sex workers. Everything, even the most simple conversation becomes very, very hard for us to say. So I have written some changes in Brazilian law that happened these years, on these 7 years, unfortunately, of course. Well, in 2015, we have this resolução. Resolução would literally means resolution, would be a little law, you know, a minor law from this LGBT Federal Council, saying that bathrooms and changing rooms and other places separated by sex in schools and universities must be separated by gender identity. And in 2015, our Supreme Court gave a decision in a case of a male forbidden to enter a woman's bathroom, and our Supreme Court was in favor of this male person. On 2018, our Supreme Court for elections issues, we have this Supreme Court, and we have a Supreme Court just for elections issues. So the Supreme Court for elections issues decided that men who identified as women should have the right to share with these women the affirmative politics we have in Brazil for women. Because since we have very few participants, very few women participate in politics, we just started some affirmative politics for us last years, and now we have to share them with men. 2018, our Supreme Court did what maybe was the most important point of this gender identity bill, which is deciding that any person in any time has the right to change his or her name and sex in documents. So what happened? This bill itself, this João Nery bill, this gender identity bill, it was closed because here in Brazil, if a bill is not approved nor disapproved in some years, it gets closed. It gets closed. It's like we say, arquivado. But the problem is that even with this bill closed, I mean, not being approved nor disapproved, the Supreme Court decided. And so we have this very different pathway from British women, because at least British women were invited to say, I mean, on GRA, we have British women had the chance to say what they think. And here we didn't have the chance to say what they think. Our Supreme Court is not elected. So they do not have to deal with the weight of this decision at all. Politicians maybe could think, oh, if I'm going to approve this, approve that, will it be good for me or not? We elected them, but these judges from Supreme Court, they're not elected. And so they decided to do this in 2018. So if I want tomorrow to change my documents to a man and saying that I'm a man, it's okay. I do not have a medical diagnosis. I do not need anything. Well, 2019, our Supreme Court transferred male prisoners to female prisoners in an action moved by an LGBT organization. This wasn't a decision for all male prisoners in Brazil. This wasn't a decision on a particular case. But usually, as happens in many countries, usually the common judges, the regular judges, they follow the Supreme Court. So maybe with this decision in 2019, maybe many judges now are gonna copy this. And this is very sad. I'm sure you've heard that we do have many men who identified as women or transvestites or other gender here in Brazil. And so women here are really, really in danger. We do have many of these men, and of course, you know that this pattern of violence doesn't change. So it's really, really worrying what may happen to this woman. And the associations they create to protect women in prison, they always have men who declare themselves women because they inserted themselves in so many women's organizations. So probably even women's organization will not have the opportunity to do anything because these guys are there. In 2019, transphobia was criminalized in Brazil besides homophobia. This was one more action started by an LGBT organizations and another left party. And this was a problem because I do not know until now anyone that was criminalized by transphobia or homophobia, because, you know, here is a very complicated country, and especially this year, you know, this year of 2020, we have so many problems besides pandemic, and I do not know. It doesn't mean it's not happened, but I mean, I just do not know. But the point is that this is being used to threaten people. Myself, I mean, my campaign against trans and kids, we are threatened all the time of being criminalized. I mean, since we started. Everything we say here about these people, we are threatened with going to jail. So, you know, I really don't know, because it's a very hard time for women here, and even for men, because we do have some men which are allies, and it's a very hard time for us. Last year, female guards of a city here in Brazil, a city in the state of São Paulo, were demanded to do body searching in male people that declare themselves to be women. And it's so sad because I've seen this news on a left vehicle, a left media here in Brazil. Of course, they decided to support the male that identify themselves as women. And this is hard, because it's really hard to believe that we are on a moment that women are being coerced to touch male's body here. It's very sad. Well, so about pimp lobby, this bill to legalize prostitution here in Brazil was closed too, but we really did have many damages here on these years. This pimp lobby destroyed so many ties between women here in Brazil, because we splitted ourselves. So many of us, I mean, no one, almost no one here really believes that prostitution is a job. But the point is, the split was between the ones who want to keep their places in their parties and their organizations, in academy, and the ones that just gave up, like me. And I repeat, I know it's a hard choice, because for many of these women, it's about like saying goodbye to any chance of being elected by a left party, or working with these people, working on this, what we say here, cabinets, this how can I say, like this bureau, this bureau that every politician has. They may say hello, they may say goodbye to so many friends, so many opportunities to grow in academy, and it's very sad.
Well, I'm very curious about what you said, Eugenia, about criminalizing transphobia. I myself have done some work in the criminal justice system in the US, and I'm just curious if you know more about what does that mean? Does the law now criminalize thoughts or speech, or does it do something similar to what in the US we would refer to as a hate crime? And I also noticed in chat, another woman asked, how does the law define transphobia, if you know?
This is a question all of us are doing, including lawyers here in Brazil, because what happens here? We have this law in Brazil that, only our judges, even Supreme Court, they're not allowed to create crimes. Only crimes here are created only by Congress people. So what did they do? What did they do on these particular situations? Our Supreme Court said that until our Congress do a law criminalizing homophobia and transphobia, we are going to treat transphobia and homophobia with the same penalties of our law of racism. I know it seems like a Frankenstein, but this is how Brazilian law is working out, because we do have a bill in Congress to criminalize homophobia, transphobia, a very old one, but it never gets approved. And maybe, LGBT organizations knew that maybe it wouldn't be approved because usually in every federal elections, the majority of Congress people elected are conservative. So maybe LGBT organizations saw it would never be, this bill would never be approved by Congress. So they tried this trick, in Supreme Court. So now what we have here in Brazil is not really a crime of transphobia or homophobia, but anyone who commits these crimes would have these penalties of this law of racism, which is a very old law, and like maybe 30 years. The problem is that for some people, this is really already a crime. And of course, LGBT organizations are always saying everybody that this is already a crime, that anyone can go to jail, commit this crime. But I do know people that think that in fact, this is not a crime yet. I mean, they had this decision, but it would only become a crime after our Congress really decide about this bill. So it's a confusion. I really do not know anyone that's already said, and we do not have really a legal definition, at least not in a federal law, about transphobia. But the point is that we do have these definitions in many other minor laws. One thing I didn't have time to explain, but is that in Brazil, we have these laws from the states, we have laws from the cities. So these definitions of homophobia and transphobia, not homophobia because homophobia exists, but homophobia and transphobia, it appears in so many other laws, in so many articles, in so many guidelines. So it almost as if we do have this definition.
Are trans activists or trans women active in sport, in professional sport in your country? What's happening with that?
Yes, one of the points I've separated here is the case of Tiffany Abreu. Tiffany Abreu is a male sport person in volleyball here in a big team. It's a very big team of volleyball, and it's working because of that guidelines from what we say. You say IOC, we say COI, Comitê Olímpico Internacional. last year, we did have some bills to forbid these things to happen. So some bills to, in some states, to sports be separated by biological sex. But since these bills were started by conservative parties, many women from the left, many people of the left are ashamed to support, even knowing it's the right thing to do.
What's happening in schools in Brazil?
Well, some schools in Brazil did have the teaching of gender identity. Last year, we have this scandal in São Paulo, is the biggest state here in Brazil, because when parents did see the materials sent to schools, they saw this gender identity on the books, and so they refused, and they made this big scandal. So they took off. But of course, that some organizations sued the state of São Paulo, and the court in São Paulo said that we just can't deny the teaching of gender identity, at least not in São Paulo. So this isn't happening in many schools in Brazil. So it really depends on the city, depends on the states. One of the problems is that even when we do not have, when we do not want, there are many ways that teachers can teach. You know, even when we do not have the material, they're able just to say something in the classroom or show a movie. They always, when they really do believe on this code, they always have a way, even without formal teaching of gender identity.
Is it not only useful sometimes to strategically collaborate with conservatives? I've actually found it helpful to read some conservative analysis, even if I don't agree with civil rights or women's rights, I don't agree with them. But I think their analysis of judicial activism, it really applies. So what do you think of that? Thank you.
Thank you. I agree 100% of us with you. We can't really, at least in Brazil, really can't have this, we cannot see things in black and white here, you know? It's almost impossible, you know, to have at least some kind of rational collaboration with both sides here in Brazil. And about this judicial activism, I'm just like you. I mean, 10 years ago, I think this would be the most revolutionary and wonderful thing. But now, when I'm seeing what they are doing here about transgenderism, I mean, it's so sad. I mean, there are kids here in Brazil changing their names with 8 years old, changing their documents, the sex in the documents. I mean, it's very crazy. And now because some judge, you know, really believe this, I know there is all this training because LGBT here has, LGBT organizations here, they have all this training in judicial systems, you know, with prosecutors and lawyers. They are all training these people and judges, or in doing seminars, I do know this exists. But even though I really think judges should be a little more rational, you know, it's a horrible thing here.